In this video, I'm going to show you how to use OpenAI's API for text generation to create a ChatGPT for Sheets hack to use titles to create meta descriptions. Let's get into it. So we're going to do this two ways. The first way will be as a formula. So equals GPT-4, which is the function we're going to write. I'm going to pass in a general prompt to summarize in 50 to 60 words, which is the average length of a meta description, what would be covered in a YouTube tutorial on, and then we're going to select and pass in the title. So that calls the OpenAI text generation API and returns the text. The second way we're going to do it is the user would highlight the title and then click in the menu this function that we added, and there it returns the result. To get started, I have a blank spreadsheet that I've added a title column and a meta description column and a few just example titles that we're going to use GPT-4 to create meta descriptions. So open up extensions, app script, and I'm going to make this screen a little bit bigger, hopefully helpful. And the first way we're going to do this, we're going to do it two ways, as I mentioned, is as a formula, and the second way will be as a function. But both follow a pretty similar pattern. So the first way, I'm going to call it GPT-4, and I'm actually going to use this like helper function where I take in the prompt and the value to essentially construct the prompt in its entirety. So I'm just going to basically concat those strings together, and I'm going to return another function called call GPT-4, and I'm going to pass the prompt in as a parameter there. So that's just a basic helper function. And now we'll write the main function, which is call GPT-4, and I'm going to need an API key from OpenAI, which will be a string, and I'm going to do that in a second, and I need a URL. So quickly jumping over here, we're going to use the text generation model to make a meta description. And so you will need a funded OpenAI account. It could be the $20 per month, could be paying for credits to run the calls to the API. And pretty helpful documentation, which I'll link to in the description. But the chat completions response takes in a model and then a messages array with basically you tell it what the user wants or what you are looking for. And I'll go to the quick start, and instead of JavaScript is what AppScript is built in, but for this, the benefit of this, we're going to take the curl URL, which is right here, and I'll also include it in the description. But that's the URL we're going to call the endpoint for the API. I'm also going to title this OpenAI API in Google Sheets. This will be helpful to rename when you call the functions, and if you need to authorize, just to provide context to the user what is needing this authorization. Cool. So now that we have that, I'm going to go create an API key. I'm going to call it public key delete later. I'm just going to all permissions owned by me, and I'm just going to put the default project. I'm going to copy that and plug it in here. They have OpenAI's API keys have gotten much longer than they once were. And so we're going to call what we receive the payload, or I think they called it embeddings or completions. I'm going to call it payload. You can call it whatever you want. The model is what we saw. And I'm going to use GPT 4o mini. And then the messages will be the role to start is the system. And the content will be, you are a helpful assistant. I believe this is in the quick start guide. And then the user role content will be the prompt we will receive as a parameter to the function that we call. Awesome. And then we also will have an options object, which is the basic construction of an API call. So this will be a post. The content type will be application JSON, and the headers will be taking an object with authorization. So the auth here, and these capitalizations are important, I believe. And we're going to put bearer and the API key to pass through the auth. And finally, we'll get a payload, which we will stringify the payload. That is the options. And now we're going to do a try catch block. E for error. Return error. And then we'll pass in the error messages. And now in the try block, we're going to do get a response. And this is where we'll use the URL fetch app class that is provided to us by Google's app script. We're going to use the fetch and with params, which would be the options that we just created that object. So URL fetch app dot fetch. We'll pass in the URL that we got from the endpoint for OpenAI's API, and we will pass in the options as I just mentioned. And then we will take the response, get content text, which I believe is a method from AppScript. And then we will take the data by parsing the JSON that we just got. I'm going to return data.choices, and the choices object, we're going to want the first choice. You could take a look at the other choices that are provided, and we're going to get the message content. What we'll do is we'll use this is the formula where we'll take in a string and we'll pass in a value, which is the title, and then we'll concatenate those together, we'll add them together, and we'll pass the full prompt through to this function that then calls the OpenAI API and returns the text that was generated. And now you'll see this orange dot means that we have not saved. So I'm going to click Command S to save. I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to say GPT-4 summarize in 50 to 60 words, because that's the average length of a meta description. What is covered in a YouTube tutorial on, I'm going to use a space, and then I'm going to select cell A2, and there you have it. We just called the OpenAI API and it generated this text. So that is pretty cool, and you can drag the formula down to get others created. So the one thing, that I guess constraint with using the formula is that if your API key, if you delete it, or something breaks down, this text will no longer work because when you reopen the sheet, it'll recall the API. That's not always ideal, especially when you have a ton of these. You'll end up copying and pasting the hard text, Command-Shift-V, to just have this be the text instead of the formula. And as you see, I just refreshed it and it's loading again. So the way to go get around that is the next step that we'll take, which is integrating it as a function call. And the first thing we need to do here is create an onOpen that uses the spreadsheet app, get the UI, create a menu, and we're going to call that OpenAI API. We're going to add an item to that menu to be basically ChatGPT for Sheets, which is kind of what we're building a replacement for, just a piece of it. Get ChatGPT, or sorry, call GPT-4. That's the function that we wrote. And I'm going to add it to the UI. And that is essentially how it gets put into the sheet once we refresh. And now we're going to need to get some of the data from the cell. And actually what I'll do is I'll create another function. Get ChatGPT, taking a prompt if you provide it one. And I will copy this, so apologies for that. And we're going to let the cell equal the spreadsheet app dot get active sheet. That basically is how we use the current sheet that we're in instead of another one, which you could feasibly call if you wanted to. We're getting the active cell. We're going to let the query equal cell.getValue. So we're getting the value from that cell. And then we're going to let the AI prompt equal prompt if it's provided. We return the prompt. Otherwise, I'm going to just hard code in what would be covered in a YouTube tutorial on, and then we're going to pass in the query that is provided from the cell value. And then a couple things that we will reuse from this function are the API key and the URL. And actually we'll take all of this from the try with the payload and the options. The only update we should need to make is changing prompt to AI prompt. I need to update this to put in the cell, not just return, because it did actually work, but it didn't put it into any of the cells. So to do that, instead of this line, which we're going to use a part of it, I just did command and then the / to comment. I'm going to do spreadsheet app.getActiveSheet .getRange, and then we're going to take the cell getRow to tell it which row we're in, because we want it to be in the same row. But we're also going to get getColumn, which are the two mandatory parameters that getRange looks for. We're going to add one because we want it to be in the column next to the title in the meta description column. And then we're going to set value equal to the result from the data. And now this should work. Let's go back and try it out. Boom. And there you have it. You should be able to use this tool and get OpenAI responses from Google Sheets. Please comment, subscribe. Let me know if you would want to see any other OpenAI APIs called into Google Sheets or Google Docs. One idea, because they just came out with the text-to-speech model, could be to read a Google Doc to you. So that could be a fun project to build. But please make suggestions, comment, and I'll see you in the next one.